Ghosts of Tsushima is a game that truly fascinated me once I learned of its existence back in 2020. I had just recently completed The Last of Us, Uncharted 1, and Horizon Zero Dawn a few months before it released, and began to really get more interested in experiencing more PlayStation exclusives. So I immediately placed a pre-order for The Last of Us 2, as it was the sequel to a game I had adored, but I also decided to pre-order a game by the studio Sucker Punch known as Ghost of Tsushima. I reviewed Ghost of Tsushima when it came out, similar to how I did with The Last of Us Part 2, but of course those videos are both extremely outdated and sloppy, and even though my opinions expressed are usually agreeable, the production values themselves aren't up to snuff with what I strive for nowadays. So just as I devoted lots of time and effort into making the best possible review for The Last of Us 2 when I revisited it, I will give Ghost of Tsushima the critical look that it truly deserves. Back then, I didn't have many games to compare it to, but now that I've had so many life-changing experiences with artistically masterful games and absolute monstrosities disguising themselves as games alike, I can decisively take a deep look into this game for the first time. So join me in this review of Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima takes place on the titular Japanese island of Tsushima and takes full advantage of its geography and topography to make for a truly gorgeous, stunning experience simply with how it's presented. The gap between Sucker Punch's previous game, Infamous Second Son, and this game was pretty much 6 years, and it's clear to see why, considering not only how large and expansive this game is in terms of content, but also with how absolutely breathtaking the visuals are. Riding through Tsushima is made an incredibly pleasant journey because of the sheer variety of incredible locations. You'll find many types of trees with differently colored leaves, many of them individually blowing and floating through the crisp air, with each and every blade of grass and wheat being pushed in the same unified motion as the leaves, and the sun reflecting off of the expansive beauty of the island. Whether the sun is shining, the rain is pouring down, or the snow is gently gliding onto the ground, the game always manages to impress visually with the locations and nature. I'd say in terms of the vegetation and visuals of this island alone, this game could easily pass as a next-gen title, and is at the top of the heap for those two categories. However, the other aspects aren't so flawless, sadly. For example, the character models, while sometimes quite impressive, fail to stack up to other PlayStation exclusives, and many of the cutscenes look awkwardly and strangely worse than the gameplay, which is kind of funny to me considering that the cutscenes are meant to look better than the gameplay in most cases. There are also a few moments where the scenes are dramatized via camera angles that distance themselves from the characters, which are kind of a hybrid between regular dialogue during gameplay and cutscenes, and I experienced many glitches with the camera's focus not knowing what to do with itself, but that's a very, very minor grievance in the face of what the game does right visually. Everything is really a sight to behold, and simply standing among the blades of a grassy field, basking in the effects of the sky's ever-changing pattern, and letting the wind gracefully blow over you really immerses you in the game's tone, which manages to go from very dramatic and action-packed to serene and subdued masterfully. This is helped a lot by the phenomenal audio design, where everything around you is handcrafted to build a soundscape which fits alongside what you're viewing flawlessly, just like in other games like Horizon and Breath of the Wild, which knock it out of the park in terms of immersing you in their unique worlds. The voice acting is to the sound design as the character models are to the graphics in my view, which means that they truly aren't bad, but sometimes feel a little bit stilted and awkward. The stories themselves, which I'll get to later, are very emotional, but the delivery of them, while nowhere near bad, left me feeling a bit guilty about my lack of emotion. I wanted to be impacted, but sometimes the presentation of scenes just couldn't get me there, which is unfortunate, but once again, this is far from enough to assassinate the game's much more abundant good aspects, one of which happens to be the music. The soundtrack of this game is simply a masterpiece, and not only adheres to the time period very well to immerse the player even further, but it is also full of emotion, passion, and creativity to make for some incredibly memorable tracks that fit with the game and its moments both slow and crazy. So overall, in terms of presentation, Ghost of Tsushima gets nearly everything right, with a stellar soundtrack, usually great voice acting, immaculate sound design, and magnificent visuals that all push its worlds and characters much further. In terms of actually playing Ghost of Tsushima, the main thing you'll be doing is fighting off enemies, mostly Mongol invaders, using an arsenal of weapons alongside the many techniques you'll learn to achieve with your trusty katana. I think this combat system manages to take a very simple template used by other games and stretch it out into something truly special, weaving fresh ideas into the foundation previously laid down by other open world games. A lot of games are quite similar to this, but they lack the many awesome concepts that Ghost of Tsushima has, making them just feel boring and basic. In this game, there are many different types of enemies to face, and every single one has a different pattern and method, making the combat feel very rhythmic and methodical, allowing you to tear through a crowd of adversaries flawlessly while switching up tactics for each and every individual one. It captures the tension of fighting one-on-one while also making you feel like an underdog going up against an army. Not only is there an extensive stealth mechanic that allows you to take out as many enemies as possible before being spotted, kind of like the Spider-Man games, where stealth is more so a bonus to get in some takedowns or kills before fighting head-on, as there aren't really many challenges you'll face when taking the stealth option. I think this is a totally valid approach for these kinds of games. Not every game needs to have stealth as the second side of their combat coin, like The Last of Us or the Batman Arkham games. And even though this form doesn't work very well in the context of the game's narrative, it's perfectly fine inside of the gameplay. I do truly love how you can either get a triple takedown in stealth, but can also take down up to 3 different enemies in a standoff depending on if you face them while hidden or head-on. It gives you a really interesting choice to make at the very beginning, but also means that if you go for the more rewarding but also riskier stealth option and get caught, you could very well get neither option and have to deal with every single enemy in immediate combat. Not only are you given this set of choices, but you also have ranged weapons, such as the powerful yet slow bow with limited ammo, and that also has multiple ammo types too, along with ghost weapons such as powder bombs that are great for crowd control, and kunai that are very helpful in a pinch to fight against larger enemies who take a while to break the block of. And of course, we can't forget the sword combat. You have a wide variety of moves to use with your sword as the game goes on, despite only having 3 options at the start. You will first have a light attack, heavy attack, and stab, but eventually you'll have access to new stances, which you can use to more easily break down the defenses of different enemy types. For example, you can use the water stance to break the block of shield enemies, and it also has a move where you can charge up a flurry of 5 quick yet powerful strikes, which is one of the coolest techniques in the whole game. You also have the wind stance against the infuriating spear enemies and the moon stance against the powerful brutes. Constantly switching up these stances is the main idea that keeps the combat in this game fresh and fascinating, and creates that tension in the arena that I previously referred to. You may very well be in a pit with like a dozen enemies all ganging up on you, but if you can flawlessly use everything the game has given to you, dodging and blocking, parrying, and rolling away at the perfect time while also using the correct stance or weapon against the enemy you're currently attacking, and being aware of things in your surroundings such as explosive barrels and wild animals in cages to release, you will be able to get out of any sticky situation and tear through all of your foes. It's one of the best combat systems, not only due to how incredibly well it mixes challenge with fairness to create an addicting, yet sometimes punishing experience, but also because of how awesome it makes you feel. It really makes you, well, feel like a samurai, and in this case, I say that without a pinch of irony because it truly does that and it succeeds with everything else it seeks to do as well. Now, even though I'd love to continue talking about this game as if it were the second coming of Forbidden West, it does have one massive issue that prevents it from being perfect. This is what left a sour taste in my mouth after I got everything in the game on my first playthrough, which was long after my review came out. The open world. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy this game heavily and love nearly everything about it. And I think this could easily be a masterpiece if you only pay attention to the story missions. But sadly, this game just had to force a massive open world. While I do love the beauty of the many areas of Tsushima, I personally think this is one of the largest examples of a game being damaged by having an open world ever. The world itself isn't anywhere close to as bad as something like Jak 2, but in terms of simply how much it holds back the potential of a game, I think this is near the top of the list. So what exactly is there to do in the open world, and why do I not like it? Well, in my opinion, an open world needs two things to truly succeed. Those being a reason to exist, and good activities to do within it that vary enough to keep things fresh. All of the open world games that I talked highly of previously had both of these things, such as Spider-Man, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Forbidden West, and even Days Gone had really great side content and one somewhat insufficient justification for such a big world. But Ghost of Tsushima is the only one yet that has neither. First off, let's check out what unique things there are to make traversing this world fun or worthwhile, shall we? The game's marketing pushed quite extensively how immersive it would be, with pretty much no HUD elements when traveling, and no waypoints or compass to guide you, but rather immersive elements baked into the world itself, such as the wind's direction and the path of flying golden birds. This is an absolutely awesome idea that more games should take note of, in my opinion. And it truly helps the immersion when you have nothing to look at but the world itself, making the game honestly feel like an E3 demo. It's impressive how well they managed to achieve this without making any navigation in my many hours of playing confusing. And even though it doesn't make the world any better itself, it sure makes it a lot more pleasant to appreciate its look. And the other aspect of this world that worked for me was just that, the visuals. They're so pretty that for a few hours I didn't mind having to make long treks through areas devoid of action, but eventually that effect wears off, especially as the game requires you to start making massive trips in between missions in Act 2. It feels more like padding than a way for you to experience a beautifully crafted world and its layout, which is what games like Horizon do, guide you through areas full of things to experience while you're making your way to new story missions. And games like Horizon also have great traversal elements, intense battles out in the open, secrets to find, and useful materials to get for survival purposes. But Ghost of Tsushima really doesn't have any of this. You do have a horse and a grappling hook, but the horse is just a way to go through areas faster, and the hook is barely used, if at all, to actually make your way through the world, considering most of it is just fields, which, yes, look pretty, but don't have meaningful experiences beneath that outside shell. And that brings me to the true downfall of Ghost of Tsushima's open world. Days Gone, and even occasionally the first Horizon, didn't truly need to be as big as they were, but they at least were full of incredibly fun and varied activities and side missions to do. But this game totally and completely fails at achieving this, unfortunately. I'll go over each of the activities real quick to show you what I mean, but first I'd like to mention that even if some of these don't sound too bad, you'll have to do an insane amount of them if you want to get 100% or have something to do the whole time you're traveling, such as how there are almost 50 Inari shrines, which is an obscene number. Speaking of Inari shrines, they're one of the most memorable activities in this game, and they entail following a fox around from its den to a statue, pressing a button by the statue, and then sometimes having to perform a short platforming challenge to get to it. Doesn't that sound so fun that you want to do it 50 times? You also have the haikus, which are short and calming experiences where you click on one of 3 options 3 times to craft a haiku on a certain topic. This is alright to do a few times as well, and it shows the beauty of the game off quite well. But doing it 20 times is a bit excessive since these get really boring after around 8 times. Lighthouses and Mongol territories are pretty much the same things, with you fighting off a bunch of enemies in order to retake the area, and in the case of lighthouses, then going into a lighthouse and lighting them after defeating the Mongols. These are probably some of the best activities to do because they're just more combat, which I love, but at the same time, there are a ton of Mongol territories, so they also kind of get stale at a certain point. Duels are also alright because they're just more tense one-on-one battles with a specific enemy, and these are also used for boss fights and side missions, and I actually quite enjoy these, But, hilariously enough, there are only 5 of them. Of all the things for them to only have 5 of, it had to be one of the most interesting activities in the whole game. Shinto shrines are fine enough, having a minute or two of platforming for you to ascend a mountain, which I found to be entertaining and a nice change of pace from the combat that is prevalent in every other area of the game. There are almost 20 of these too, but I don't mind that as much, because these are quite fun. Bamboo strikes are probably the best activity in the whole game, as they require you to tap buttons really fast in order to cut bamboo properly. It tests your reflexes pretty well, but the fact that a button-mashing minigame is the best this game has to offer in terms of side activities truly should concern you. And finally, we have 2 of the laziest quote-unquote pieces of side content to ever exist in an open-world game that I have ever played. Pillars of Honor and Hot Springs. Pillars of Honor are pillars with a sword kit or piece of gear on them, and they might every once in a while have a few enemies near them. But Hot Springs go even further by having you step into a bath, press one button to choose what you want the main character Jin to talk about for a few seconds, and then to get out of the bath for a health increase. It's one of the worst excuses for something to do in an empty open world game I've ever seen, and the whole thing was clearly just an excuse for the developers to show off Jin's naked model. You might be putting up some sort of facade with these Hot Springs Sucker Punch, but I see right through it, and let me tell you, the model doesn't even look that good. It looks like PS3 graphics. So joke's on you, I win again. But in all honesty, this is just disappointing. It brings me no joy to dog on a game like that. But if a game is so nonchalant about cramming boring and lifeless objectives into its pointlessly large world, I have to address it. Not to mention the side missions, 80% of which feel the exact same and are extremely boring, usually have you just investigate 2 areas and get into 2 small battles. And in both of my playthroughs, not a single one of them really left an impression on me. Maybe other than the one with the fake samurai, which was pretty funny. Mythic Tales are, on the other hand, side missions that actually give you new pieces of gear or techniques of legendary status. So they're actually full of variety and awesome, stylish cutscenes. So if you want something to do in the post-game and wish not to bother with the other boring schlock, I'd recommend these, since they're awesome. So yeah, unfortunately Ghost of Tsushima fails at having an open world with many purposes or entertainment value, and even though occasional bits of fun at the shrines or Mythic Tales pop up, it's truly sad to have long segments of boring, repetitive stuff in between some of the coolest story missions out there. But no game is perfect, and that just so happened to be this game's largest issue. I'm sure in a sequel they can update the scale to be more digestible, or add more interesting things to do, but for now, Ghost of Tsushima is hurt quite a bit by its open world. In terms of story, Ghost of Tsushima truly starts to redeem itself. On my first playthrough, I was underwhelmed by the story, but looking back, this is a great narrative. Even though the acting and pacing, as well as transitions between gameplay and cutscene, leave a bit to desire, the general plot and story are really great here. I made it very clear that I am not a fan of the open world here, but the story missions truly do an excellent job at nearly everything, and part of that is the story surrounding them. The characters are very memorable, from the influential and intelligent Yuna to the stubborn and powerful Lord Shimura. All of these characters stand out from one another and have an important influence on the events of the story. Much of the story is grounded in reality and history, and pretty much all of it is quite realistic, with very few fantastical elements whatsoever, making it even more impressive how memorable and creative this game's story is, as it has tons of staying power without needing to veer into an apocalyptic future or another world entirely. At first, it seems like it might just be a typical story of people rising up against their oppressors, but the complex character work that gradually shows itself through the game is truly what pushes this story to an incredible level. And I think it really took me until now to understand its value, due to my lack of understanding for the connection it had to the broader issues going on with many people, even to this day. The storyline of the people of Tsushima fighting back is an insanely uplifting and awesome one, with you gradually building an unstoppable team of friends, new and old, to take down the evil invaders, with some of your allies such as Lady Masako having incredible, compelling motivations for joining you. It's one of the best underdog stories I've seen in a game, and with what has happened to so many countries throughout history, and even for the love of God to the very moment at which we speak, is one that resonates with this world and likely will forever. The idea of the people fighting to keep what's theirs in spite of impossible odds is a common idea for media, but that doesn't make it any less incredible in this game. But, as I said, this is not the true story being told in Ghost of Tsushima, even though it alone could have made a really good one. Instead, we have a focus on the journey of Jin and his struggle between fighting against the invaders with the honor that he has been taught to always respect, and to do anything possible to protect his people, even if he must resort to dirty tricks to get there. It's a very clear choice to someone like me that he should go down the path of the ghost, so to me the struggle seemed ridiculous at first, but this time around I recognize why it's hard for him to break what he's believed is correct for so long, and is still instructed to follow by his uncle, who is his only blood relative left. The relationship between him and his uncle beautifully connects with his inner struggle, and it's incredibly heartbreaking to see them drift apart, being a great example of how conflicts that we never wish to come from the outside can tear us apart. I also love how he becomes closer with Yuna, who pretty much becomes like family to him, and she teaches him the way of the ghost, meaning he not only has to choose between these two paths for himself, but also for the sake of his connections with these two people he cares about very much. Moments such as the true release of Jin being the ghost and fighting without any mercy or hesitance in the Battle of Yarikawa, after many missions of building up their defenses and preparing for battle, and the final battle in the game perfectly capture the emotional progression of this character and the broader ideas that said progression ties into, making them memorable beyond just being awesome fight scenes. It's clear that Jin was written this way to show the struggle between doing what's right and respecting tradition or expectations from others, which is a very tough choice that still plagues many of us right now. It's not easy to leave behind what you know and thought was correct for the sake of what's right, because at the end of the day, even if we agree on the morality of a situation, we need the right strength in our will to break through all reconsideration and hesitance, and that is not inside of everyone's heart from the beginning. I wish the ghost and samurai dichotomy was as much of a difficult choice for the player as it is for Jin, because it would establish a connection between the two that only the greatest video game stories manage to achieve, and that would also make an incredible use of Sucker Punch's previous morality mechanic from the Infamous games to make the gameplay stick out even more too. But nevertheless, I fell in love with this story in every considerable way this time, and I cannot wait to see where it's taken next.
I see your value now.
In the end, Ghost of Tsushima is much better than my memory led me to believe, with an incredible story that I previously misunderstood, tons of memorable, inspiring moments, an awesome combat system with tons of variety, and absolutely drop-dead gorgeous visuals with beautiful, immersive ideas and music. Even though the open world hurts the pacing massively and fails to live up to its potential, really hurting the game, and some mechanics really could have been given more time to become more interesting and unique, this is a great game that I wholeheartedly recommend.
You have no honor. And you are a slave to it.